Today's Bible study comes from John chapter 6, verses 16 through 24, and it reads as follows. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. But now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. The next day, the crowd that had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake realized that only the boat had been there, and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but that they had gone away alone. Then some boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. Amen. This is just talking about when Jesus walked on the lake. Um, Now it says his disciples went down to the sea and got into the boat. Um, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat. You can see that in Mark 6:45, and it tells you that he had done that. And they set off across the Sea of Galilee because Jesus told them to do it. Um, and he compelled them to go back across, to embark and go back across the lake. Perhaps he saw that they were being infected with the crowd and excitement. Maybe things were changing. It was already dark there, and several of the disciples that they knew were accustomed to, being there and fishing at the lake and everything. Um, but the thought of running across the lake at night didn't concern them, so they were ready to go. And Jesus didn't go with them at this time. This actually was the second time Jesus dealt with his disciples on a stormy sea in Galilee. The first storm, was Matthew. It's in the book of Matthew, I think, chapter 7 or 8. Now he was with them. He was present with them in the boat, and he rebuked it. If you remember that, he told the storm to calm down. But in this storm, Jesus asked his disciples to trust him and trust his unseen care and concern for them. They hadn't seen it. He was saying, have some faith. That's what he was really saying. So when the sea started acting up, it whipped the waters, and it had the sea bad. It wasn't calm, and this wind was blowing, and as it was blowing, it just kept getting worse on the sea. It got violent. The storms got heavy, and it made the lake a place you didn't want to be on, like it was in a storm, like we always do. So, what's Jesus start doing? um, so when they rowed about 3 or 4 times, they saw Jesus walking. That's what he did. He was walking on the sea and drawing closer to the boat. And they were afraid because remember, it's a violent time, and Jesus is just out there walking. And what we forget is that Jesus was walking through a storm, and there was no problem for him. It also tells you that in the storm, when you with Jesus, everything is calm with Jesus. I don't care what the outside may be doing. If you with Jesus, it's just a walk. It's a walk of faith. It's trust. So in the storm, when they rode these 3 or 4 miles away, they were terrified because look at Jesus walking. Who could this be? And I bet you they were probably not just afraid, but frustrated because Jesus had told them to go across the lake, and they were working hard to get there, but they hadn't gotten there. So who did they see coming towards them? Jesus the Christ, and they were afraid. And it tells you that in Mark 6. It says, the disciples were afraid because they thought Jesus was a ghost or a spirit. And we done had times they thought he was a ghost or a spirit. But Jesus was just showing you who he is and what he does. And in this storm, he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid," because in the storm, he controls it. He got you. It's still calm when Jesus is walking. And it was enough for Jesus to announce his presence to them. And then he was with them. And their fear that they had was going to change, because they knew that this was the flesh. This was Jesus walking on the water to them. And then, of course, what does Jesus do when he goes through the storm with us? He takes us through it, because it says, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. In this storm where we were afraid, and we see Jesus and we know Jesus is there, and even if we don't see him, we know he handles the storm, and to be with him in the midst is to be calm and peaceful, and you let him do what he does, which was walk through this storm like it wasn't anything. And guess where he got them? To where they were going. And guess where he'll get you? To where you're going. So the next day, the crowd had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake, and they started realizing a few things. They started seeing, hey, nobody was there. So they willingly received him into the boat. The disciples did. And as I said, it hit land. But on that following day, the day after the miraculous feeding of all these people, and after crossing the Sea of Galilee, Jesus and the disciples wondered where they went. The crowd that was fed by Jesus wondered where they went, wondered where him and the disciples went. And they saw the disciples, but they didn't see Jesus leave in a boat. And they realized that Jesus was not there with them. And then other boats came from Tiberias. And it's a introduction of the boats and where they came from. And it tells you that they also got in the boats and came to Capernaum. And what were they doing? They were seeking Jesus, because of what he had just done and what he had just showed us. Have faith in the storm. Jesus is always calm in the storm. And if you walk with him and stay with him, he will get you to that safe ground. Amen.